Hi, welcome to 5.08, The Government is a Police Officer 1. This is starting on slide 15. Limits on economic choice. The government restricts economic choices in a number of ways. Many of the activities of modern governments restrict the economic choices of their citizens. In addition to taxes, people have to obey laws that regulate the workplace, the flow of money, and even their own property. Land use laws, labor laws, price controls, trade restrictions, and banking regulations are all examples of government restrictions on economic choices. For the most part, these restrictions are intended to achieve certain economic benefits. While they may be beneficial, they do limit the freedom of the free market. Test your knowledge on the benefits of various restrictions on economic choice. Limitations on economic choices are not the only way the government can restrict freedom. The government quite often limits individual choices in other areas, including education, communication systems, and the natural environment. By looking at regulations governing these areas of your life, you will see how the government can affect the free choices of individuals beyond economic restrictions. As with limitations on economic choices, these government restrictions are intended to benefit some segment of society or for society as a whole. Restrictions on education. Many governments provide educational resources for their citizens. In countries as different as the United States and Cuba, for instance, public education up through high school is provided free for every citizen. In the U.S., however, everyone also has a right to send their children to the private school of their choice if they can afford to do so. But governments also sometimes put restrictions on education. For example, women and minorities in some countries are prohibited from receiving certain types of education. This used to be true in the U.S. At one time, women were barred from many universities, while public schools were segregated by race. In the states of the U.S. South, segregation in public schools was enforced by laws. Even if a black child lived right next to a white school, it was illegal for him or her to attend that school, while many students were forced to travel many miles to a segregated school. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregation in public schools is unconstitutional. Later rulings banned gender discrimination in public universities. There is now a high level of educational equality in the U.S., but many schools still face challenges as they try to provide comparable educational facilities to all citizens. Compulsory education. The U.S. government does restrict free choice in education through a requirement known as compulsory education. In the United States, all children of a certain age are legally required to receive an education at least to the age of 16. Compulsory education may be completed in a public school, in a private school, or through homeschooling. Restrictions or requirements on education have a big effect on children's futures. When the government requires parents to make sure their children receive a minimum level of education, the government takes partial control over how parents raise their children. At the same time, because values and education are so closely linked, the government is also limiting parents' choices about the values they want to instill in their children. Education and economic opportunity. Restrictions or requirements in the area of education have important economic effects. Education level is a major factor in determining the economic opportunities people enjoy. Most high-paying jobs require skills and knowledge that can only be acquired through education. Government restrictions on education have a direct bearing on opportunities in the job market. If women or minorities are limited in their educational opportunities, this limits their economic opportunities as well. Since wages affect purchasing power, restrictions on education affect spending as well. Earning potential increases with education level. If you're a high school student trying to decide about college, consider this. Someone with a bachelor's degree will earn nearly $1 million more than a high school graduate over the course of his or her lifetime. Freedom of expression. Restrictions on education have an effect on personal development and economic opportunity. Limitations on freedom of expression can have an even more profound effect on people. Freedom of expression is often rare in non-democratic governments, but even in democratic countries, limitations on freedom of expression can exist. These limitations can come from the government's desire to maintain security and control during a time of crisis or war. While freedom of speech in the United States is a constitutional right, exceptions have been created over time, based on certain types of speech and expression and under different contexts. Some speech restrictions include the use of words that incite violence or criminal behavior, false statements of fact, threats, and speech owned by others. Some people want the government to restrict speech that they deem indecent or offensive, and to limit the broadcast of obscene and pornographic material. The goal of these restrictions is usually to promote an obscenity and pornography-free society. While these goals are often worthy, there are downsides to the restrictions. Restricting the expression of unpopular ideas or words and phrases believed to be indecent or offensive can also restrict new ideas. When unpopular ideas are banned, good ideas might get eliminated along with the bad ones. By preventing people from saying and hearing everything there is to say and hear, society limits the possibilities for personal and collective advancement. Censorship and economic growth. Censorship slows the development of individuals and communities alike, but it has important economic effects as well. You have seen how freedom and competition lead to innovation and efficiency in many ways. Conversely, when people cannot speak out, the pool of ideas that can stimulate innovation shrinks. The government can direct people to pursue research and development in areas it chooses, but ideas will eventually stop bubbling up naturally, as they do in the free market. When a government censors information it considers objectionable, it also restricts economic activity. When the only information that people can access is information the government wants them to have, it is bound to be incomplete. Good information is crucial for consumers, but it's also essential for producers. When a society is cut off from outside sources of information and ideas, it is difficult for domestic producers to keep up with advancements elsewhere. Censorship can leave a country behind in the technology-driven global economy. The Internet and free expression. The Internet has done much for free speech and the sharing of ideas. It has changed life in so many fundamental ways that it is hard to imagine life without the Internet. The Internet instantly puts massive amounts of information at people's fingertips. It also allows for highly efficient communication. The Internet has opened up lines of instant communication across the globe, and it provides countless arenas for people to express their views. This new form of communications technology has allowed people and communities to develop and progress. It has also encouraged economic growth as innovative ideas and cutting-edge industries develop out of the global exchange of ideas and information. Censorship and the Internet. The Internet creates major problems for governments that want to censor information and control freedom of expression. The international nature of the Internet, coupled with the inherent difficulty of keeping information out of it, makes censoring the Internet a nearly impossible task. The Internet also poses problems for governments that are caught between the desires to keep tight political control and the wish to lead the global economy. This is exactly the problem faced by China. The Internet helps the Chinese government's goal of becoming an economic leader in the 21st century, but it conflicts with the government's desire to maintain tight control over its population. Google's foray into the Chinese Internet market highlights the difficulties of controlling information and free expression on the Internet. Find out about it on the slideshow. Environmentally friendly. Environmental protection laws restrict certain activities that damage the natural environment. These laws aim to protect the environment primarily by preventing or reducing pollution and limiting the use of certain natural resources. Protecting nature is a goal that many citizens want their government to pursue, even though it can involve restrictions on individual freedom. These government regulations are based on the view that environmental protection is a public good. It is not usually profitable for private producers to limit their exploitation of natural resources or to curtail the pollution they cause, so the government steps in on behalf of the people to ensure that the environment is protected. But when governments enact these laws, they do more than just protect nature. There are important economic effects as well. Environmental protections can result in safeguarding natural resources that are necessary for production. The downside of environmental laws. Controlling pollution and limiting the exploitation of natural resources can also carry heavy economic costs. For example, when a company has to abide by environmental regulations that limit the output of certain industrial byproducts, such as carbon monoxide or toxic chemicals, it can cost a lot of money. These increased production costs are passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. In addition, the enforcement of these regulations involves taxpayer-funded government agencies. Restrictions on exploiting natural resources can also cost jobs. When the government restricts the amount of logging that can go on in a particular area, logging companies cannot maximize their production, and fewer loggers are employed. The income lost to both workers and investors limits economic growth. There is almost always a tension between economic development and environmental protection. Laws that protect the environment are supposed to be in everyone's best long-term interest. Many people accept these laws and push for even more restrictions and stricter enforcement. But critics argue that these regulations not only restrict the freedom of producers and workers, they also harm everyone by limiting economic growth. Limiting personal choice. Education, freedom of expression, and the environment are just three of the areas in which the government restricts choices outside the economic system. Government restriction curtails people's choice in very fundamental and influential ways. Some of these effects are beneficial, such as providing educational opportunities, while others are detrimental, like limiting personal and community development. Just as importantly, restrictions on non-economic choices often have an impact on the economic system, sometimes in ways that are positive and sometimes in ways that are negative. Test your knowledge of the economic effects of government restrictions that occur outside the economy. And this ends 5.08, the government is a police officer 1. As always, let me know if you have any questions or concerns about the information. And that will wrap up the Unit 5 recordings. Have a great day, everybody.